I want to start by saying something that I know is going to sound strange, coming from a man who spent 22 years working in law enforcement. The thing that broke that case open was not forensic evidence. It was not a witness coming forward. It was not a confession or a tip or a surveillance camera or anything that shows up in the procedural crime dramas people watch on Sunday nights with a glass of wine in their hand. It was a dog, a 4-year-old German Shepherd named Buster, who could not speak a single word and did not need to. Because what that animal did over the course of 3 weeks in Calhoun County, Tennessee, told us everything we needed to know about what happened to Rachel Morrow on the night of September 14th, 2017. And I am going to tell you all of it, every detail, because Rachel deserves for people to know her story, and Buster deserves the credit he never got. My name is Daniel Pruitt. I was a detective with the Calhoun County Sheriff's Department for over 2 decades before I retired in 2021. I have worked homicides, disappearances, assaults, cases that kept me awake for weeks, and cases I still think about in the quiet moments, even now. I have seen things that permanently recalibrated what I understood about human beings and what they are capable of doing to each other. But the Morrow case is the one I come back to more than any other. Not because it was the most violent, not because it was the most complex, but because of how close we came to never knowing the truth at all. Rachel Morrow was 31 years old when she died. She lived in a white 2-story house on Crestfield Lane in the small town of Dunmore, Tennessee, population just under 4,000, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody and news travels faster than the internet. She had grown up there, gone to Dunmore High School, left for college in Nashville, come back like a lot of people come back to small towns when the city stops feeling like home. She worked as a veterinary technician at the Calhoun Animal Clinic on Route 9. She had a vegetable garden in the backyard that her neighbors always said was the most impressive thing on the street. She volunteered at the county food bank on the second Saturday of every month. By every account, she was exactly the kind of person that a town like Dunmore produces and is proud of. She had been married for 3 years to a man named Gary Morrow. He was 34, worked in regional sales for a pharmaceutical company, traveled frequently, smiled easily, and made friends without apparent effort. Everyone liked Gary Morrow. That is one of the first things people told me when I started asking questions. Everyone liked Gary. Rachel was found on the morning of September 15th, 2017, at the bottom of the staircase in her home on Crestfield Lane. The call came in at 7:12 in the morning from Gary himself, who told the dispatcher he had come downstairs to find his wife collapsed and unresponsive. His voice on that recording was controlled in a way I have listened to many times since. Not flat, not robotic, just managed. The kind of control that takes practice. The responding officers found Rachel at the foot of the stairs exactly as Gary had described. She was wearing her robe. There was a mug of tea shattered on the floor nearby. The working assumption in those first hours was a tragic accident, a misstep at the top of the stairs in the early morning, a fall, a catastrophic injury. It happens. It happens in houses across this country every single day. The medical examiner's initial assessment did not immediately contradict that assumption. There was blunt force trauma consistent with a fall. There were no obvious signs of a struggle in the immediate area. Gary was cooperative, visibly shaken in that managed way of his, and gave a clear, consistent account of the evening. They had eaten dinner together at home, watched television, gone to bed around 10:30. He had slept through the night and come downstairs at 7 to find her. The case was on a trajectory toward accidental death. And then I met Buster. Buster was a 4-year-old German Shepherd that Rachel had raised from 8 weeks old. She had trained him herself. She worked with animals professionally, and it showed. He was not an aggressive dog by nature or by training. Every neighbor on Crestfield Lane knew him. The Hendersons next door had a 5-year-old daughter who used to come over specifically to play with him in the backyard. He was the kind of dog that made people who claimed not to like dogs reconsider their position. I met him on my second visit to the Crestfield Lane house, 2 days after Rachel's death. Gary had let me in and Buster was in the kitchen, and the moment I walked through the front door, that dog looked at me with the most direct, sustained eye contact I have ever received from an animal, and then he went back to what he had been doing, which was lying with his chin pressed flat to the kitchen floor, staring at a specific spot on the baseboard near the corner cabinet. He was not distressed. He was not whining or pacing. He was simply focused, with the kind of absolute stillness that felt deliberate rather than passive. I noted it and then moved on. What I could not move on from was what happened when Gary came into the kitchen while I was asking him follow-up questions about the evening of September 14th. Buster stood up, not quickly, slowly, like a decision being made rather than a reflex. He positioned himself between me and Gary, and he looked at Gary with an expression that I am going to struggle to describe accurately because it was not something I had seen on a dog before, and I grew up with dogs my entire life. It was not aggression. His hackles were not raised. He was not growling. He was not showing teeth. He was watching. Watchful in a way that was almost forensic, like he was cataloging something. Gary laughed it off and said Buster had been acting strange since Rachel died and that he figured the dog was grieving, which was a reasonable explanation. Dogs grieve. Anyone who's ever loved a dog knows that. But something about the way Gary said it, and something about the way Buster watched him say it, stayed with me on the drive back to the department. 2 days later, I got a call from Linda Ashworth, Rachel's older sister, who had driven up from Chattanooga to help with arrangements and to collect some Rachel's personal belongings. She asked if she could speak with me, and we met at the small diner on Main Street in Dunmore on a Thursday morning over coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since Tuesday. Linda was composed in the way that people who have been crying for days eventually become composed, not because the grief is lessened, but because the body simply runs out of the resources to keep expressing it outwardly. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, and she told me about Buster. She said she had been staying at the Crestfield Lane house for 3 days, helping Gary sort through things. She said Buster had been calm with her, affectionate even, in the way she remembered him being before Rachel died. But every time Gary entered a room, Buster went still and watchful in that way I had already observed myself. Then she told me about the basement. She said Buster had started scratching at the board of the basement, not frantically, again, methodically, persistently. Every morning when she came downstairs, he was at that door. She had mentioned it to Gary, and Gary had said the dog sometimes went down there with Rachel when she did laundry and was probably just confused. She said she believed him at the time. Then she said, "But I went down there myself yesterday morning when Gary was at work, just to look, and the basement smelled wrong." I asked her what she meant by wrong. She looked at me over her coffee cup and said it smelled like bleach, heavy bleach. The kind of smell that gets into the back of your throat, in a basement that, according to Gary, had not been cleaned in months. I set my own coffee cup down very carefully. I went back to the medical examiner that same afternoon. I sat across from Dr. Patricia Wen, who had been doing this job in Calhoun County for 19 years, and I asked her to look at Rachel Morrow's case again with a specific question in mind. I asked her whether the injuries were definitively consistent with a fall, or whether they could be consistent with something else. Dr. Wen looked at me for a long moment with the expression of someone who has been thinking the same thing and waiting for someone else to say it first. She pulled the file. She told me that the primary trauma was to the back of the skull, that in a forward fall down a staircase, the most common impact points are the forehead, the nose, the chin, the hands from an instinctive attempt to break the fall. Rear cranial trauma in a forward staircase fall was not impossible, but it was... She paused and chose her word carefully, atypical. She also told me there was bruising on Rachel's upper arms, faint, partially obscured by the lividity patterns, easy to overlook in the context of a fall. Bilateral bruising on both upper arms in a pattern consistent with being gripped from behind. I applied for a search warrant for the Crestfield Lane property that evening. The judge signed it the following morning. We executed the search at 7 a.m. on a Thursday. Gary was present and maintained his composure with the kind of discipline that I had stopped admiring and started finding deeply unsettling. He stood in the living room with his arms folded and watched us work with the expression of a man who was either genuinely innocent or had spent considerable time preparing for this exact moment. Buster sat at the top of the basement stairs the entire time we were in the house, not moving, not making a sound, just watching the door. The bleach smell hit us on the stairs, heavy and chemical, and layered over something underneath it that the bleach had not fully neutralized. Our forensic technician, a methodical woman named Sandra, who I had worked with for a decade, went to work on the basement floor systematically. Luminol does not lie. The entire northwest corner of that basement floor lit up. The volume of blood that had been cleaned from that corner was not consistent with a minor injury. It was not consistent with anything minor at all. Rachel Morrow had not fallen down the stairs. Rachel Morrow had been killed in the basement of her own home and then moved. Buster had known. For 3 weeks, Buster had been lying with his chin pressed to the kitchen floor above the exact spot where his person had died and scratching at the basement door every single morning and watching the man responsible with those steady forensic eyes. He had been telling us the whole time. We just had not known how to listen.
Gary Morrow was taken in for formal questioning that afternoon. I sat across from him in interview room 2 at the Calhoun County Sheriff's Department, and I watched the composure finally begin to develop hairline fractures as we laid out what we had found. He held it together for a long time. I will give him that. He was intelligent, and he had clearly thought about this moment and prepared for it. He had answers for the blood evidence. He had an explanation for the bruising. He had a version of events that he had constructed carefully and rehearsed thoroughly. But here's the thing about a carefully constructed version of events. Every single brick in it has to hold. And we had spent 3 weeks finding the bricks that did not. The life insurance policy on Rachel was for $750,000. It had been taken out 14 months before her death, with Gary as the sole beneficiary. Rachel's own family had not known it existed. A woman in Nashville, a colleague from Gary's pharmaceutical sales territory, had been in a relationship with him for 8 months. She had not known he was married. He had told her he was separated and that the divorce was almost finalized. A purchase on Gary's personal credit card from a hardware store in a town 40 minutes from Dunmore, 3 weeks before Rachel's death. Heavy plastic sheeting, industrial cleaning supplies, bleach in a quantity that nobody buys for household use. When I put that receipt on the table in front of him, the last of the composure went. He did not confess dramatically. It was not like the movies. He just deflated, like something structural inside him gave way all at once. He looked at the receipt, and then he looked at his hands, and then he looked at the wall, and he was quiet for a very long time. Then he asked for a lawyer. He was charged with first-degree murder that evening. I walked out of that building into the cold September air and stood in the parking lot for a moment and breathed. Gary Morrow was convicted of the first-degree murder of Rachel Morrow in March of 2019 after a trial that lasted 11 days. He is currently serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville. Linda Ashworth took custody of Buster after the trial. She sends me a photograph every year on September 15th, the anniversary of Rachel's death. Buster is older now, graying around the muzzle the way German shepherds do. But his eyes in every photograph have that same quality I noticed the very first time I met him. That directness, that steadiness, that watchfulness. Rachel would have been 37 years old this year. 3 months after the conviction, I was going through the last of the case materials before filing them, and I came across something that had been logged as evidence, but never fully examined because by the time we found it, the case was already closed. It was a small digital voice recorder, Rachel's, found in her bedside drawer during the original search of the house. The recordings on it were dated across a period of about 6 weeks before her death. They were quiet, private recordings, Rachel talking to herself the way some people journal, just processing her days out loud. The last recording was made at 11:47 p.m. on September 13, 2017, less than 8 hours before she died.
In it, Rachel's voice is low and careful, and there is a specific quality to it that I recognized immediately from my years of interviewing people who were frightened but trying not to show it. She said she had found something on Gary's phone that she was not supposed to find. She said she did not know what she was going to do yet. She said she needed to think. Then she said, "Buster has been acting strange around Gary for weeks. I keep telling myself it's nothing, but he has never been wrong about a person before, not once in 4 years." She paused. Then she said, "I should have listened to him sooner."